everyone. Today we have our another new episode. We will discuss on nature tech. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith. What you want to share about nature tech, Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, thank you so very much. I can tell we're already having some internet problems because I lost most of what you said, but that's okay. I can go from where we are. You know, uh, Nature technology is really one that is coming into recent play, and I think of it as both nature technology. I think of it as bio and biotechnology, and how we begin to use all of those together. And I have to tell you, I have a particular bias for this one. Um, Back in 1993, I was asked to make a forecast for the United States government on the future of biological computing. And that is computing which is using biologics, explicitly strands of RNA and DNA and others for storage and computing. So my background goes on this pretty far back. The other thing I just want to get out of the way up front, and I don't think Dr. Sharif even knows this. I was asked as one of six futurists in the last issue of Business Week of the last century to tell them what I thought this 100 years were going to be all about. And I talked about how the 2000s were going to be about the age of bio, and how biologics and bio are going to shape this 100 years. And now 22 years in, I'm actually tracking really well with the age of bio. And nature tech and bio to me are synonymous as what we're talking about uh, going forward with this type of activity. And there has been many years a connection between nature and technology, and we see the places. If we go back and think during the growth of humankind, many of our drugs, many of the things we dealt with, many of the things that we pull together in our life were taken from nature. And particularly where we are today with looking at the greenhouse gas and the environment and everything else, it's great for us to go back and look at nature tech again as a way to respond to it. Nature is an extreme system. It kind of automatically knows how to self balance between the different elements as we're going forward. Technology, on the other hand, is something we're still learning how to balance it. And pure technology by itself, it can be complicated to learn and control. So part of the way, part of the premise between uh, nature tech and bio is how do we begin to take the best of our worlds and combine them together. Earlier this week, we did a program on Web 3.0, and we talked about how Web 3.0 was the uh, pulling together of the physical world and the digital world. Well, this is even taking it further. We also spoke a couple of weeks ago about the future of digital healthcare. And digital healthcare actually is taking nature tech and extending digital healthcare as we look at regenerative healthcare and we look at immunology and other things. So this type of nature tech has actually been featured in many of Dr. Sharif's national World Talent Economic Forum programs in the past without us even saying that it was nature tech or saying that it was the bio or the age of bio. So Dr. Sharif has been doing a great job of giving you the elements of it to prepare you for where we are today. And what we need to do is understand how we can learn and take away from nature and what can be put into technology and into action with technology. And can technology learn from? Can it contribute? Can it technology actually help enhance the balance we have between our technology world, our physical world, our mental world, our natural world, and everything together? And how can we look at them in balance? Uh, One key point we've learned from past mistakes is that we need to find a way to incorporate technology into sustainable design and how to incorporate it within the systems of systems that we know there. We know from many, many scientific studies that being in or close to nature has great health benefits for our well-being. Particularly our minds, how we build. We have seen for many millennial that as we build with some of the best nature provided material, that they give you holistic medicine. And at least here in the United States, we say Western medicine, which is dominated by pharmaceuticals, versus Eastern medicine, which is more of a nature-driven approach. Uh, we can see the differences in what we're doing today, at least again here in my country, is we're seeing the two of them combined. So we're seeing nature tech tremendously impacting our healthcare system here. Um, and we want to see it. We also know that oftentimes, like when we're in earthquakes and others, some of the building materials that are nature tech survive some of our man-made things. I go back and look at the Great Pyramids versus and the Roman roads that were built versus some of the roads today. And quite honestly, I like the Roman roads better because they've stood the test of time versus the technology we're using today to do this. And so this is another place where I think we can go back and relearn from nature and the nature technology and apply it today, and how we can do it. Great ideas usually come from when you're in tune with nature, where you're in tune with what your customers want, what the other people want. And you see that when you have the synthesis of those, they are a great way to be a catalyst for innovation. Uh, and so, many ways, there's several quotes that you just jump out on here, and this is one that has I've seen from many different people. I'm going to paraphrase it: is that technology should be seen as a tool, not the solution. uh, that we as humans, we're always the solution to our problems, and our technology and our nature will respond to it. And as we talked about at the very top of it, that nature is an extraordinary example of a self-sustaining system. And nature technology should build upon this concept that it is a self-sustaining system and that the inputs work with each other. Some of the goals, as we look in what is increasingly known in the environmental side, is closed loop manufacturing, closed loop products and things where you design them a way to be sustainable, environmental friendly, but then you go all the way through retirement that when you're no longer using those products, they should either go others like that. So again, nature tech is a place that is being really put in today's new business processes and new formations that can work there, and how that can work. Cities and countries are beginning to understand the importance of putting people and nature together and nature tech together, and they're using designs and technologies and tools to help look at innovation ideas to connect the use of space, of technology, of people and nature. Uh, and we see this everywhere we go. We see children beginning to adapt this very well. We're seeing that green space in cities combined with other technologies is now uh, becoming a much more active space as we're looking at it. We also see something called biometric design, which is where nature is really inspiring technology. So, one of the great examples of this one that I see is, at least here around me, we're seeing more and more wind turbines used as part of the green energy process. But if you go back and look at the design of the turbines on many of the big windmills, they were designed by the humpback whale's body structure. They're one of the most elegant swimmers and divers and jumpers in the sea, but these aerodynamic abilities are really contributed a lot to part of the way their body is constructed. And a biomechanical engineer went back and looked at the differences here and how come they were so good, and it was because of some of the elements on their body. And he used these and used some of their fins at different angles to that they use to increase lift and things that he's put into the wind turbines. You see other things. You see uh, some other fishes being used and part of their body structure to look at efficiency. And they have actually taken some like the box fish and used it in automobile design to become more efficient. Mercedes Benz is one that has really pioneered some of these nature tech ideas into their design. You see in Japan that the kingfish fish was used as part of the design material in things that they did with their bullet trains. Uh, the example is really interesting because it was inspired by nature.
Professor David. I'm sorry, I think that Professor David has internet issues, internet problem.
Okay, I think I'm back.
Yeah, yeah.
So you see these, and then biotech is really there. At the simplest view of going from a pure nature tech to a biotech. Biotechnology is technology based on biology. Biotech harnesses cellular and biomolecular processes to develop technologies. And what I love about looking at this, and when I was doing biological computing roadmap, we've used biological processes of microorganisms for over 6,000 years to make food products such as bread and cheese and others. We are seeing more and more biology being used today, biotechnology, nature technology, uh, to put breakthroughs of looking at rare diseases, to reduce our environmental footprint, to feed the hungry, to look at how to rebalance our energy and go to others, and even to have a cleaner, safer, more efficient industrial manufacturing process. So, for example, nature tech is being used to harness the nature's own toolbox and using our own genetic makeup and our own immune system and other things like that with the advances in immunology and others to reduce the rate of infectious disease. I believe immunology, as we begin to understand how to edit and enhance our DNA, will be one of the elements that will help us cure many different types of cancers. Uh, we're seeing nature tech and biotech being used to change serious life-threatening conditions. We've talked on the past in other Sharif's programs about personalized medicine, and this is a place where nature tech and biotech is being used for that. We're seeing it used as markers around the world to identify serious disease and particularly pandemics. The COVID and the monkey flu and others are great examples where nature tech and biotech has been used to advance what we're doing. If we look into the fuel industry, we're seeing this type of technology being used to lower the temperature for cleaning clothes and others by taking more of the nature tech, combining it and using it. We're seeing reducing our use reliance on petrochemicals. We're using biofuels to cut greenhouse gas, for example. We're using all different types of nature tech as we look at how to decrease water usage and waste generation. A great example is a biomass reactor I was helped use in one of the developing nations over in this hemisphere, one of the poorest nations, and in fact, the poorest nation in our hemisphere, because of over farming, because of earthquakes and hurricanes and stuff. Haiti has a horrible history of their farmland. And what we did is we began to build a bioconversion plant there, which took the leftovers from their agriculture, from the plants and the byproducts of the animals, put it into this reactor, combined with some other nature elements. It produced electricity, it provided new jobs, but also the byproduct of the conversion process is fertilizer that could be put back out and replenish the nature of the growing plants around them. So this is a great example of where nature tech came together in a very different way, and it affected dozens of different outputs from combining the different nature elements using some of our advanced technology in a biomass conversion plant to use it and solve problems there in a developing nation. Like I said, it's the poorest developing nation over in my part of the world, uh, and you're seeing that we're also one of the other byproducts of some of the other biomasses where the types of plants and food are different. It's actually becoming other waste products, and because of this type of nature tech, it's letting us feed the world even better. We're seeing more of the nature tech coming together to lower the volumes of agricultural chemicals that are being used to have high yield crops and to use as natural and insecticides, uh, so that we don't have to use it. And that allows farmers to reduce the tilling of the farmland. It allows us to reduce the chemicals that are used, and it's also developing crops with enhanced nutrient profiles that will let us go and look at how do we solve the vitamin and the nutrient deficiencies. How do we produce these crops in a way that are healthier for us and can help prevent disease? And how can we do it to improve things? Like, one of the goals, as you look at going back to using some of the nature tech in agriculture, is we're seeing ways to improve food and crop oil content to improve part of a vascular type of disease. Um, the other thing is, for example, I saw a study earlier in the year that there's more than 250 biotech healthcare working to treat disease. You're seeing uh, millions and, well, tens of millions of farmers around the world using agriculture, health tech, biotech to increase their yields and doing that. there are hundreds of biorefineries being built across the world to where we can begin to use them, put them back. There's just so many different elements where this is happening and where we as citizens here of the world are really beginning to understand the impact. And what is not evident to most people is, when did this happen? You know, we talked earlier, again, on another one of Sharif's programs, about the ages we've gone through and the fact that, we were in the industrial age and we're now moving forward with it. Well, this type of nature tech actually goes back to the progression. If we go back to, for example, in our agricultural life, we used to farm using sticks and stones to cultivate the field and begin to do that. And then we began moving forward with that and we began to use metals. And then we not only began to use, uh, well, before even we used metals, we then used cattle and donkeys and horses to help us plow the fields better using sticks and stones. And then from the horses doing that, we had metal involved and attached the metal to the back of the animals to begin doing that. And then we continued to progress through tractors and where we are today using autonomous tractors with sensors that we don't even need to have a human being in the cab of the tractor to work many fields today. And we're using satellite based communications to make it accurate. And we're using computer models and even the concept of digital twins now to grow food and to harvest food. So this is a great example of where nature tech has gone back thousands of years as we've progressed through it, but we've reached a point where our technology is beginning to tip back, and we're going more and more back to some of the nature concepts, the bio concepts. When I made the forecast for Business Week that this century is about the age of bio, it's including all of these things. You've heard me talk about bio in the computing industry. You've seen me talk about bio in healthcare, in manufacturing, uh, in agriculture. We see companies that we're beginning to go through just tremendous change and like that. The pharmaceutical industry is, even though it was totally manufactured for a while, we're seeing even with the pharmaceutical industry's response to COVID and the vaccines they're making, what allowed part of the rapid process is looking at the RNA code improvement and beginning to modify the RNA code and beginning to attach other things to it and use as part of the injections that can be used during that process and being adapted to it. Um, so I've talked about many of the different industries that can be there. And is one of the big ones. Healthcare is one. Manufacturing is beginning to have impacts by this. We see it in the energy industry and many others. Um, what I'd like to do though is take that back 1 second. And as we do often on this, as we look through the World Town Economic Forum filters and lenses, what's the impact of this for developing nations? Well, in some ways, developing countries have an advantage over developed countries on this, in that in many instances, all along, the developing nations were closer to nature tech than the developed ones. And so there's a natural affinity for beginning to look at, how can I use this? How can I use all the resources I have around me? Many of the developing countries do not have the best logistics systems in place, particularly for international transport of raw materials. So there has been a natural history of saying, what can I do with what's around me? How can I enhance it? And what we're seeing is, particularly with today's global communications where everything's digital and where it's easy to do digital modeling, that developing countries have a natural ability to, within the entrepreneurs, into the education institutions in developing nations, to step back and say, what are the elements in nature around me? How can I use those to either build new technologies, to be enhanced by technology I have, or how can I take the synergy between those and work together? Everything today is we are synthesizing information not just from our local environment, but from the environment we have globally. And how can we apply best practices from around the world using nature tech and biotechnologies and traditional technology and my ways that my parents and their parents have done for centuries to use the nature that's around us to enhance and move forward. Um, I know I sometimes over talk about this one, but the world today is really a system of systems world. And if you think about nature, nature by definition is a system of systems world. It's that closed loop, it's that self-sustaining systems that we talked about at the top here. And nature is a great way to use as a modeling tool on how we should look at building our countries, particularly our developing nations, because you want to look at how to look at that ecosystem, how to look at those elements and make it self-sustaining, how you can make it an evolving supportive system. Uh, I would love to see universities begin to put courses in place on how you can take nature, technology, put them together in a way, begin to create digital twins of those so that we can model the impacts before we go out and damage nature or make changes that with large unintended consequences as we do nature and technology combined together. Entrepreneurs. I have in my mind a particular bias that developing nation entrepreneurs can be more innovative using nature tech than those in developed nations because of the history of the environment around them, because the fact that developing nations have to be more self-sufficient in many ways than the larger nations. We've seen this uh, particularly in the last year with the impact of the logistic chains being disrupted as an event as a result of COVID. And some of the larger nations that relied very heavily on shipments, for example, out of China, the larger countries have suffered a lot. The developed nations have suffered a lot more than the developing nations with the disruption of that supply chain. Now, a lot of it goes back to nature tech because the developing nations, again, like I said, had to rely more on that as they've put themselves together. But this is such a very, very interesting topic and one that, as you hear, is close to my heart as we go with this one. The other thing I would like to say is that back in 1999, when I was in Business Week with the forecast for this 100 years and saying it's going to be the age of bio, it touched all these areas. It also talked about regenerative healthcare. It also talked about part of what we saw out of the COP27, which happened in Egypt recently. It talked about how we, as the world, need to come together into without respect to national boundaries and to look at the bio impacts of what we're doing. We all know that environmental change is a global problem and not a, a particular nation's problem. Well, the application of nature tech and biotech is something that is a global capability as well too. It's using our capabilities as a human species. It's using our capabilities of the world that we live in to go and apply it with technology. I would like to remind the audience one more time of what my definition of technology is. And the definition I use is it's the application of knowledge to achieve a result. The application of knowledge to achieve a result. And nature tech, bio fit that really well because we're using our knowledge. We're using our knowledge of nature. We're using our knowledge of the processes that have been on this planet for millennia. And we're using our understanding of the human body and others to do it. Neural networks are becoming much, much larger. Well, neural networks are modeled after our neural networks in our brain. In the future, biological computing takes that the step forward. This biological computing uses the same building blocks as we have in our mind, as we have in our brain, as we have in our body. We're looking at ways to change our communications process. And some of the newer models are ones which are built up on how our nervous system interacts with the rest of our body and how that can be modeled to using nature tech and bio to change the world. So that's to me some of the more interesting elements of it. And Dr. Sharif, I think that's probably as good of an explanation as I can give you through this, even though it is a personal passion of mine with the age of bio for the century.
Thank you. Excellent analysis and excellent informations you are sharing for our audience. Professor Talib Rifai, we are discussing on nature tech. So if you want to add something or if you want to ask questions to Professor David Smith, you can.
I can ask David to summarize to me what he said because I was not able to connect, please, in a summary.
I'll give you a really high point.
Yeah.
One of the highlights of my career, Dr. Cleave, is the last issue of Business Week of the last century. I was
Yes.
one of 6 futures they asked to say what this future, this 100 years is going to be. And my forecast is this 100 years is going to be about the age of bio.
Yeah.
And, 22 years into it, I'm tracking really well. And I was also back in the mid 90s, I was asked to do a roadmap for a group in the United States on biological computing. And we're at the point where we're seeing biological computing come in. But impacts of everywhere. If we go back millennial, and the example I used was farming when we started with sticks and stones, and then we put cattle behind it, then we went to steel, then we went to the other things. That was an evolution of nature helping influence our technology in healthcare today, in transportation, in many, many industries. We're seeing the influence of nature and bio uh, combined with technology dramatically changing our world. Uh, if we did not combine nature and technology, we would not be able to feed the masses today.
Of course, of course.
We have the ability, going back to nature-driven approaches to try to solve climate change. Uh, we have examples through everything, even the way we're redesigning our computers using neural networks, the way we're looking at solving some of the communication challenges, going back and using massive parallel approach like our nerves and our body do. Our nerves don't go down a single path, they go down multiple paths using a nature-based approach. Well, we're beginning to use that in the physical world now to solve our problems. And I believe you were on the show where we talked about Web 3.0. And what Web 3.0 is about combining the physical world with the digital world. And nature tech is a key part of that. So that high level summary, I said a few more words than that, but those are probably some of the key
Thank you.
points.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Talib,
So,
any?
so,
Yes.
so let me ask you another question, please, if I may. You have a passion for this. It has to combine technology with nature,
Hmm.
right?
Well, and that's
Or,
and they influence each other.
okay, okay. But what about the production of this technology? Technology is a costly thing when it comes to climate change.
Well, what I'm going to do, and I think you came on right after this, I'm going to give you my definition of technology. To me, technology does not have to be a thing. The definition I love is technology is the application of knowledge to achieve a result.
Yeah,
And
like
nature,
like the old technology.
that's right. And
Yeah,
nature is a driver of that view. As we see the systems evolve and do it, the one of the very first things I said on the program is that nature is an extraordinary example of a self-sustaining system. It automatically knows how to adapt and change and how to balance to create harmony throughout. And see, classic technology, on the other hand, is something we're still trying to learn to balance. It's complicated to learn, to control. And so, how can we take this nature tech, how we can take bio and combine it with classic technology? And classic technology should be seen as a tool and not the solution, because people and nature will always be our solutions to our problems, and how we as humans, how we as the world and the planet respond to it. And nature tech and bio applied to solve our problems are a natural way to look at answers. And
okay.
because we're in a systems of systems, which Dr. Talif, you've heard me talk about that too much,
Yeah,
but that systems of systems view is really driven by nature tech, by biology, and our real world, our technology combine to be systems of systems that we live in today.
yes. Okay. I want to ask another question, please. Now we have a problem in our part of the world with water. Water is a very serious problem. So
Globally.
irrigation is technology as well, isn't it?
Hmm.
Okay.
So
So yeah, go ahead.
water is a very interesting one. I live in Texas in the United States,
Yeah,
and West Texas is a very dry part of the United States.
yeah.
We have,
Like our country.
yeah, it's like Jordan stuff.
Yeah,
We're about the same latitude. We're about the same place on the equator.
yeah.
Um, and what we've done is we've looked at using different ways to use nature and produce more plants that did not need as much water. We've looked at ways to use pure technology and, and and pour water together. An example I used earlier in the program is if I go back and look at roads and aqueducts that were built by the Romans and compare them to the roads we have today, my roads don't last long, where the Roman roads have lasted hundreds and hundreds of years.
That's right. That's right. We still
And,
have
and,
that. We still have.
and the
Yeah.
Roman roads were built using more of a nature driven approach, more of a bio approach than what we're doing today. And so going back and apply those, if I go back and look at how, again, I'm going to use the Romans as an example there, how they began to use different views of nature and taking their own technologies to enhance their crops. And they did it by using what they had at the time. They did not have a lot of the advanced they didn't have advanced computing, they didn't have advanced sensors, they didn't have the elements, but they were able to, within their own domain, solve some of their
So by
water
aqueducts, by aqueducts.
by aqueducts, but also not just by aqueducts. They changed the plants. They modified binding to plants, ionizing them, to come out with plants that did not use as much water. And we're going to see that. But the other thing that we can do, I think, Dr. Tlaib, with what we're doing, is you've heard us talk about modeling and simulation using digital twins. I think part of the way we will do that, it solves part of the agricultural problems, the water problems, is by using some approaches like that, using sensors. You know, uh, here in Austin, last week we had 3 days of heavy rain.
Yeah.
Most of that washed down into our rivers and is now out into the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
I would have loved if we could have some nature tech
Dams.
approaches. Well, not even necessarily dams, but ways to rechannel the water,
Yeah.
to rechannel it into ways that doesn't necessarily disrupt the flow of the river, which is what dams do.
Yeah.
And when you build a dam, it changes the whole ecosystem of not only what's upstream behind the dam, but it changes the ecosystem of what's below the dam
Yes.
because you don't have the nutriments, you don't have all the other things flowing in the water. But my approach is more, I think, of a nature approach, and this is kind of what we saw uh, people in Rome, in the Roman areas did. It was what we saw in Egypt and others. Is they diverted water more, and they diverted it in a way that not as much flowed out into the ocean,
Yeah.
and more was captured. But they didn't dam up the rivers, and they used it in different ways. And if you look at most of the Roman aqueducts, as you mentioned, they were not they were not from dams, but they were how can I rechannel water and redirect it? And I think that's part of the solution to it. I also the other point today, and I think you with your background with the UN and stuff will resonate this today. Too often today, water has become a geopolitical card,
Yes, that's right.
and we see places like uh, between Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, where water is being used for political gain.
Well, we have the same thing in Jordan between us and Israel.
Yeah, same thing
Yeah.
there too.
Yeah.
And you know, so it's not just a nature approach to it. Once you throw politics into it, it becomes a much different equation of how you can balance it, how you can pull the pieces together there. We have the capability of nature, of using our advances in technologies, of learning from what we've done in the past and modeling, simulating what we need to do in the future. But it's really hard when politics get involved
Yeah.
because politics are usually irrational,
Yes.
and that the simple views of nature, the simple views of technology frameworks are always upset by politics, be it national politics, be it politics within a company, within an industry. They all give you variables that are hard to predict and hard to manage. And you know, I go back and just look at you can tell. I think there's a reason the windshield on a car is bigger than the rear view window. It's more
Yeah.
important where you're
Yeah.
going than where you've come, but it's very important that you can take advantage of where you've come. And the examples you and I've used here of the Romans, of what they've done in Egypt, what they've done in other places, are prime examples of where we need to learn from the past and learn from where nature was used in the past to to influence more nature tech, more bio as we go forward.
Okay. Would you consider the conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia also part of that?
I'm not deep enough into that one to have
Yeah.
a learned answer. Well, most likely. I mean, I was. My son is in a Roman reenactment group. I mean, he's 28 now, and he
Okay.
has his own iron mail and stuff. But he's a studier of history in that area, and we actually have had discussions about some of the conflicts in your part of the world, some of this current standoffs, some of the ways that what we saw in the past evolved. My son Christopher reminded me of the Battle of Antiople, which was one of the last great battles in your part of the world back during the Roman era.
Yeah.
And a lot of its outcome was influenced by nature and how those elements were used. I think we can still
Yeah.
learn from things like that today. The
Yeah, but
one,
we cannot dismiss the political part there.
oh,
The
we
Romans
cannot.
controlled the world at the time. They
I
were the
know,
most powerful power, and
but
they were
that was
able
also,
to. Yeah.
but that's also was the last great battle that led to their downfall.
Yeah.
The Battle of Antioch. So
Yeah.
yes, we can't control the politics, and that was the point I was trying to make, is that the politics are the wild card. That if I look at nature and nature tech, if I look at bio and can model from those and learn from those, we have a more self-sustaining, self-regulating view of innovation than we do when we throw politics into it.
Can't hear you.
Well, that to me is part of the big
Yeah.
point here, and that is I look at the age of bio and how it's convenient. I would tell you, even though we have quantum computing, which I love, and I actually led the first quantum computing roadmap in the United States, but
Yeah.
the age of biocomputing is the one where I think we're going to see some of our greatest breakthroughs in healthcare. We're seeing going back to bio. Uh, Immune therapy, helping restructure the body's immune system, helping look at, for example, cancer cells are like stealth airplanes. They have this shield around them that our body immune system cannot see and get through. And some of the immune therapy today is using things in our body to enhance and destroy the shield around the cancer so that our own body immune system can attack it and eliminate cancer cells from our body. That's a nature tech. That's a bio approach to it that we're now going back into. So instead of using harsh chemicals with chemotherapy, instead of burning the cells with radiation, we're looking at ways to enhance the body's ability using nature tech, using biotech to go and attack cancer cells.
Yeah.
And that to me is part of the age of bio. The way we're looking at regenerative healthcare. Uh, you know, I've had a retina detachment and I've had a retina tear because I'm getting older. You notice, Dr. Sharif, I'm not old. I'm getting older.
Yeah.
And as you get
So am
older,
I. So am I.
you know,
So am I.
the inside of your eye dries up.
Yeah.
And see, there's now approaches that will let me use stem cell technology and interject in my eye to regenerate the elements inside my eye that are drying up. And that is using nature tech to solve that problem as you and I get older. And we're seeing that in many, many different industries, which is the point that I was trying to make in the first half of the program is Dr. Sharif said, David, go and talk about this area. And it's like I said, it's one I'm
It's your
passionate
passion.
about. Well,
It's your passion.
it's a passionate one because of the six futurists that Business Week picked to talk about this century, only two of us are still in the running for our picks. The others have what they said fallen off the table in the first 22 years.
Hmm.
And And part of it's the processes we use. And uh, I use a view of 6 different views of the future as part of my balancing act as I look at the future. Real quickly, you're either an extrapolator, a pattern analyst, a goal analyst, a counterpuncher, an intuitor, or an artist. And each of those have different techniques underneath it. But you
Yeah.
have to use all of those to be accurate about the future. And if you think about what I'm doing with that, is I'm actually modeling nature and creating a framework on how to forecast and map to the future. So even the way I do my future work is part of a nature tech, a bio approach, as you
Yeah.
look at it. And that's what's given me the accuracy. And my teams get the accuracy to do the things we've been able to do and actually, quite honestly, do things that have helped change the world.
Yes. I agree with you. I agree with you, Professor David. I think you touched a very important issue. It's not an issue that I'm an expert in, but I'm learning a lot from you. I really am. And I would like to
I
see a
learn a
little
lot
bit
from
more.
you every time, too.
No, 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 not in this one. In this one, you're an expert, really. Now, what I need to say is we're both getting old. I have Parkinson now. Is Parkinson also part of that?
Well, there are a lot of advances in Parkinson, and we are seeing increasingly abilities to use to help reshape part of the body system, the
Yeah,
responses in with that.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
also seeing in Parkinson the ability to combine approaches used for other elements to be used in there too. But Dr. Cleve, I want to go back and change one word in your vocabulary if I can.
please.
You said we're getting old.
Older.
I think we're getting older.
Yeah,
And see, to me, that's part of the world. Is as we see how we're applying all this stuff, we know life expectancies are continuing to rise. As we get regenerative health care in there, as we learn how to enhance the body's ability to work with nature and use nature in our own body to help solve disease, we're seeing how we can apply other technologies to make travel safer, how to make those things happen. And those are the things that will dramatically extend. My forecast is that the kids today who are in elementary school
yeah,
will live to past 150 years old
really.
outside of trauma.
You're very optimistic.
Well, and as we're seeing the trends in regenerative healthcare, I think that's a pretty uh,
Realistic.
realistic view.
Yeah,
Again, now trauma is a different story. If I'm killed in a car accident, if I'm shot in a war,
that's,
if I have
that's something
those,
different.
it's something different.
Yeah,
But in an equal status view, I believe the kids today will live to 150 years old. I hope I live into my hundreds.
yeah,
Um,
you will.
and uh, but things can happen. I could be hit by a car today walking out in the street. We're supposed to be 14 degrees here tonight, and I don't do well in ice and snow. I'd rather be on a beach in the sun
Yeah,
than in the cold. And so I know that's going against me, but it's the differences that we see. You know, if I lived in Northern Europe and in Canada and places here, they can't stand the warm. 80 degrees to them is really hot. I'm not hot until I'm in the hundreds.
yeah.
But
Should
don't
come to
put,
the Dead Sea.
yeah, and I love it there. But don't put me where it's freezing because I don't
Yeah,
do well.
yeah,
And that's part of how nature tech actually works. Is that's a great example of how we as humans adapt using nature tech to the environment around us. If I'm used to being in the cold, it's there. If I'm in the Mediterranean, if I'm in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, if I'm around Okinawa in that area in Asia, that's the temperature environment I want to live in.
You should come to the Dead Sea in Jordan. The Dead Sea is the lowest spot on earth. It's very
I
hot
know
there, and it has lots of oxygen because it's slow.
because
So
it is.
people get naturally healed by being there. I go there and I can sleep better. I can walk better. I'm a better person when I'm there. You're
And
right
it's
about that.
it is because our body responds to the energy fields around us. And see what you described there is an energy field with the higher oxygen. That the Dead Sea area has more sodium in the air.
Yeah,
I'm better at a saltwater beach than I am inland because the salt in the air has a cleansing effect. Again, that's nature tech that we should learn from. So
yeah,
what we're seeing in some of healthcare now is we're seeing salt rooms being built to have patients go and spend time in the salt rooms to help improve their overall health. Again, another great example of us today going back to nature and saying how can we use it to enhance our well-being. And these examples are just becoming more and more numerous. So with Dr. Sharif picking this topic for the program, he's brilliant in seeing how this can apply. And my point I made earlier is the developing nations are at an advantage for applying this type of bio and this type of nature
because nature is nature.
because nature is nature and they've had to depend on it more.
Yeah,
They haven't had the same type of logistic chains that I have here in Austin,
yeah,
where we don't have to depend on it as much. But we're seeing the ability to come back and stretch it. And the developing world, I believe, has an advantage in this area. But you can combine them. I'm a true believer that the concept of digital twins will accelerate this. And that's why actually my forecast of kids with 150, I think is realistic because we're using tools where we can model that, we can simulate it, and we can do it fast. Instead of having to do experiments on animals in a lab or growing plants with all the different variations, I can do that using digital twins.
mm,
And in the time it would take to do an experiment on 3 different plants, I can do something on 10,000 different simulations by using a digital twin. And so that's going to let us speed up our ability to look at how to solve the challenges we have in this world.
okay. But looking at the developing world again, looking at the developing world, we have the nature. It's the same nature that you have. That's true. But we don't have the technology to go about it. We don't have the knowledge to use it in the proper way, right?
Well, I'm going to actually disagree a little bit with you in that I'm going to go back to my definition of technology. Technology is the application of a knowledge to achieve a result. And if I look at the developing world, so if I look at uh, your part of the world and look at how you've used things, a couple of years ago, I was looking at how to uh, cool electronics and how to cool computer centers and stuff like that. And you know, one of the
Yeah,
things I looked at, Dr. Tweedy,
yeah.
actually it was in Jordan and uh, the one that's just south of you, Syria, is that it?
Saudi,
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia.
Y'all created hundreds of years ago natural air conditioning that did not use a coolant, didn't use fans. You created natural ways to move air through the facilities
Yeah.
that today, with some of the companies I worked with back then, they are now adapting that approach to cool electronics, to
So what you're
cool.
saying, Professor David, is we need to go back to the traditional way of doing things.
We need to learn from the traditional way,
Yeah.
not necessarily go back, but we need to learn from them and
Yeah.
learn how to apply them as part of our
Yeah.
way. I mean, I would, my summers are warm here,
Yeah.
and my electricity bills are high. I would love to begin to adapt some of that to lower my bills. In some ways, we have. You know, uh, we're seeing places to use convection a lot more here, and we're seeing houses do some structuring similar to the homes that were discovered in Samaria in the last decade, where the roofs, instead of being single, were three levels,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's an approach there.
That's right. Yes.
So to me, that is part of my answer to you, is that we can learn from all those, but that three-level roof is not economical to build the way it was built there. It was built that way there because that was the materials you had on hand. I can now take other
But it is
approaches.
economical now. It is economical now.
Yeah, I can take other approaches and simulate that and do it by using a composite structuring and by using different types of materials to build it with, without having to do as much physical separation.
So what you're saying is we get to get the principles out of the
And get the principles.
experience of the past, but not
Hmm.
apply it immediately. I
Yeah,
mean, we
you don't have to
should
do
allow
something.
technology now to
You don't have
develop this new.
don't
Yeah.
have to duplicate it, but you can apply it.
Yeah. I agree with you. I completely agree with you, Professor David. That's a very, very educational session for me
Thank
and
you.
for others. Yeah.
Thank you. This is excellent session. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Uh, I'm really impressed how you contribute in different topic, uh, and this is actually one of the best sessions. I learn a lot from today's sessions. And
Yeah.
Professor Talib, you are the example for the youth community of the developing nations.
Yeah.
Even when I take class, I give all of your example. And today you say one of the very important things. I think that our youth community should learn from you. You also
Yeah.
say, I'm learning from today's sessions. So this is the things that the big man, the polite man, they always love to learn. And Dr. Talib is a very, very good example how he contributing for World Talent Economy Forum. And in this age and in this stage, still he is learning. So that is the major important
We continue to
thing.
learn. Continue to learn.
Continue to learn. Yes,
Yeah.
continue to learn.
Lifelong learning, Sharif. That's what's important. We're in a
Yeah. Very
time
much.
of
Very much.
lifelong
Yes.
learning.
Yeah.
Very much.
So yeah, yes, today's session is actually very important for all of us. Thank you, Professor David Smith. I know that you have a very special meeting, but you continue 1 hour of sessions. You are one of the best scholar of World Talent Economy Forum. And Professor Talib, hopefully we can see you this April, coming April, because
You'll
we have
see
a
me.
very important
You'll see me.
conference.
You'll see me.
Yes, and I want to invite you all in our sessions. Thank you, Professor David Smith, and thank you, Professor Talib Raphael, for your
Thank you. Thank you.
excellent,
Thank you, David.
excellent contribution for today's session. Thank
Well,
you. Bye
thank
bye
you.
and take care.
Thank you, David. Bye. 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 See you. Bye. We need to talk more.